Racist landlord refuses to rent to a black mum and her children until her billionaire boss arrived and everything changed. A hard-working mum just wants a safe home for her kids, but the landlord slams the door in her face, saying he doesn't rent to her kind, right in front of her terrified children. She tries to stay strong until the kids ask a question no mother should ever have to answer. What she doesn't know is that her powerful boss overheard every heartbreaking word, and overnight he flips the entire situation upside down in a way no one saw coming. But when his bold move explodes into a citywide scandal, dark forces rise up, ready to crush her, silence her, and protect their secrets at any cost. Now the whole city is watching, and the people who tried to break her are only getting louder. But when a simple act of justice triggers a war, how far will a mother go to protect her children, and how far will one man go to fight for what's right? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as Danica Holt and her children walked toward the red brick apartment building. Her heart fluttered with nervous hope. After weeks of picking up extra shifts and carefully saving every penny, they finally had enough for the security deposit. 9-year-old Louise held her right hand while 7-year-old Aaliyah skipped along on her left, humming softly to herself. "Remember what we talked about?" Danica said gently, squeezing their hands. "Best behavior for Mr. Briggs, okay?" "Yes, Mama," they answered in unison. The building looked even better in person than it had in the photos. Clean windows, neat flower boxes, and a freshly swept entryway. Most importantly, it was just 2 blocks from the children's school. No more long bus rides, no more rushing to make it to work on time after dropping them off. Kellen Briggs waited by the front steps, his pressed shirt and shined shoes reflecting his strict standards. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes as they approached. "Good morning," Danica said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm Danica Holt. We spoke on the phone about the 2-bedroom apartment." Briggs looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment before giving it a brief, limp shake. "Yes, well, follow me." As they climbed the stairs, Aaliyah whispered, "Mama, look at the pretty flowers," pointing to the geraniums cascading from window boxes. "Inside voices, please," Briggs said sharply, not turning around. Danica felt Aaliyah press closer to her side. She ran a soothing hand over her daughter's braids, noticing how Louise's shoulders had tensed at the landlord's tone. The apartment itself was everything they'd dreamed of. Sunny rooms, clean walls, even a small balcony where Danica could imagine setting up a few potted herbs. The children's eyes went wide at the sight of their potential bedroom. "2 closets!" Louise exclaimed softly, already planning where he'd put his science projects. "And look at the window seat," Aaliyah added, running her hand along the painted wood. Danica pulled out the carefully prepared folder containing her pay stubs, credit report, and references. "I have all the documentation you requested, Mr. Briggs, and the full deposit amount ready?" "That won't be necessary." Briggs's voice cut through her words like ice. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking at them with undisguised disdain. "I don't rent to your kind." The words hung in the air like poison. Danica felt as though she'd been slapped. Beside her, Louise went very still while Aaliyah's small hand clutched at her skirt. I don't understand," Danica said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "My credit is good. I make 3 times the monthly rent. I can provide additional references." "I've made myself clear," Briggs interrupted. "This is my building. I get to choose who lives here." His lip curled slightly. "And I choose not to rent to you people." Aaliyah's voice quavered. "Mama!" The confusion and hurt in her daughter's voice pierced Danica's heart. She drew both children close, straightening her spine. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Briggs," she managed, her voice calm despite the trembling in her hands. "We'll see ourselves out." The walk down the stairs felt endless. Briggs's footsteps echoed behind them, making sure they left. Aaliyah stumbled on the last step, and Danica caught her, murmuring soft reassurance even as her own eyes burned with unshed tears. Outside, the same morning sun now felt harsh and exposing. They walked quickly to the bus stop, Danica keeping her children close. Only when they were seated on the bus did Luis speak, his voice small. "Was it because we're black, Mama?" Danica's heart cracked a little more. She pulled him close, including Aaliyah in the embrace. "Some people judge others without knowing them," she said carefully. "But that's their loss. We're going to find an even better place, I promise." The rest of the day stretched long and grey. Back in their cramped motel room, Danica tried to keep things normal. She helped Luis with his homework, while Aaliyah coloured at the small table. When dinner time came, she heated up soup in their little microwave and served it with crackers, trying to make it seem like an adventure rather than necessity. "Like a picnic," Aaliyah declared, sitting cross-legged on her bed with her bowl. "Exactly." Danica smiled, though her heart ached at how easily her children adapted to their circumstances. After the children had finished their homework and changed into pajamas, Danica excused herself to the bathroom. Only then, with the fan running to mask any sound, did she allow her tears to fall. She pressed her hand against her mouth, muffling her sobs. The weight of responsibility, of constant rejection, of trying to shield her children from the world's cruelty, it all crashed over her at once. 5 minutes. She allowed herself 5 minutes to cry. Then she wiped her face, took several deep breaths, and squared her shoulders. Her children needed her to be strong. When she emerged, Aaliyah had already crawled into the bed they all shared, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight. Luis was sitting on the edge, waiting. "Can we pray, Mama?" he asked. Danica's throat tightened with love for her sensitive, thoughtful son. "Of course, baby." They knelt together beside the bed, hands clasped. The neon sign from the motel office cast alternating red and blue shadows through the thin curtains as they prayed for guidance, for strength, for a home. Later, with both children finally asleep beside her, Danica lay awake, watching the play of lights across the ceiling. Aaliyah's soft breathing mingled with Luis's occasional murmur. Despite the day's humiliation, despite their uncertain future, the simple fact of their presence beside her filled her with determination. They deserved better than this. Somehow she would find a way to give it to them. The neon lights continued their steady rhythm, red, blue, as the little family slept, huddled together on the sagging motel mattress, holding on to each other and their dreams of home. The morning sun crept through the motel window, casting a pale glow across the cramped room. Danica had been awake for an hour already, quietly ironing their clothes with the small travel iron she'd packed. She touched Luis's shoulder gently. "Time to wake up, sweetheart," she whispered, careful not to startle Aaliyah, who was still curled up like a small comma against her brother. Getting 2 children ready in a motel room required careful choreography. Danica had perfected their morning routine over the past few weeks. Bathroom turns scheduled precisely. Breakfast of instant oatmeal heated in paper cups, teeth brushing at the small sink. She braided Aaliyah's hair with swift, practiced movements while Luis pulled on his school uniform. "Remember to pack your homework folder," she reminded him, securing Aaliyah's second braid with a bright yellow elastic. The walk to school took 20 minutes, their footsteps echoing through quiet residential streets. Aaliyah skipped ahead occasionally, stopping to examine interesting pebbles or fallen leaves, while Luis walked close to Danica's side, his hand finding hers at street crossings. "Will you pick us up at lunch again?" Luis asked as they approached the school building. Danica nodded, adjusting his collar. Same as yesterday. Wait for me by the front office, okay? She hugged them both tight, watching until they disappeared through the heavy double doors before turning toward downtown. Her own workplace, the gleaming Mercer Innovations Tower, was another 15-minute walk away. The early morning air held a hint of autumn crispness that made her quicken her pace. The security guard nodded as she swiped her badge, already familiar with her early arrivals. The elevator carried her to the 14th floor, where her small cubicle waited, one of dozens arranged in neat rows. She liked arriving before anyone else, enjoying the quiet as she organized her day. As project support staff, Danica's role involved coordinating meetings, preparing documentation, and ensuring everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. She took pride in her attention to detail, in anticipating needs before they arose. By 9 o'clock, when other employees began filtering in, she had already reviewed 3 project timelines and updated 2 presentation decks. The morning passed in a blur of emails and phone calls. At 11:45, Danica gathered her things for the lunch break. Instead of heading to the cafeteria like her colleagues, she made her way back to the school, timing her arrival just as the lunch period began. Luis and Aaliyah were waiting exactly where she'd asked, their backpacks stuffed with books and half-finished art projects. "Hi, Mama." Aaliyah launched herself into Danica's arms, while Luis offered a more reserved smile. "How was your morning?" she asked as they walked back to her office, holding both their hands. "We learned about butterflies," Aaliyah announced. "Did you know they drink with their feet?" Danica made appropriately impressed sounds as they entered the building. The security guard smiled at the children, already used to their presence during lunch hours. In the elevator, Aaliyah pressed close to her mother, suddenly shy around the suited professionals sharing their ride. The 14th floor was relatively quiet during lunch hour. Danica led her children to Conference Room C, the smallest meeting room that was rarely used. She'd discovered it her first week, when desperately trying to figure out how to manage without after-school care. The room had become their unofficial lunchtime sanctuary. "Remember our quiet voices," she reminded them, as she settled them at the far end of the conference table. She spread out their lunch boxes and coloring books, making sure they each had water bottles within reach. While the children ate their sandwiches and worked on their drawings, Danica prepared documents for the afternoon's department meeting. She could hear Aaliyah's whispered commentary to her brother about the purple unicorn she was creating, mixed with the soft scratching of crayons on paper. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her tense slightly, but most people walked past without noticing them. She'd chosen this room specifically because it was tucked away from the main traffic areas. As she sorted through presentation handouts, a shadow fell across the doorway. Wyatt Mercer stood there, his tall frame filling the entrance. Danica's heart skipped. She'd seen the CEO in passing before, but had never been this close. His presence was commanding even in casual observation, his dark suit impeccably tailored, his expression typically unreadable. Before she could form words, Aaliyah's small voice carried clearly in the quiet room. "Mummy, why did that man hate us?" The question hung in the air like shattered glass. Danica froze, heat rushing to her face as she realized Mr. Mercer had heard. Her daughter's innocent query about their apartment hunting disaster now exposed to her employer's ears. When she dared to look up, she found Wyatt Mercer's expression had transformed. The usual mask of professional detachment was gone, replaced by something softer, more human. His eyes held a depth of concern that made her throat tight. For a moment that seemed to stretch endlessly, no one moved. Then Mercer's gaze shifted from Aaliyah to Danica, and she saw something else there. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. Without a word, he stepped back from the doorway and continued down the hall, his footsteps fading gradually. Danica released a shaky breath, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered the scattered papers. Through the conference room's glass wall, she could see Mercer's path to his corner office. He paused at his desk, then moved to stand at the floor-to-ceiling windows. Even from this distance, she could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands clenched at his sides. He stood motionless, staring out at the city below, and something in his posture spoke of old wounds and memories better left buried. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken weight, until Aaliyah's crayon dropped and rolled across the table, breaking the spell. Danica turned back to her children, forcing a smile as she helped retrieve the wayward crayon, but she couldn't shake the image of Wyatt Mercer's haunted expression as he stood alone in his office, seemingly lost in thoughts of a past that still held power to trouble him. The evening sun cast long shadows across the motel parking lot as Danica guided her children from the bus stop to their temporary home. Room 214 had become familiar over the past weeks, though she tried not to think about how much of their savings the nightly rate consumed. "Who wants to be the banker?" she asked brightly, pulling out the worn Monopoly box they'd brought from their old apartment. The game board had belonged to her grandmother, its corners soft with age. "Me!" Luis's hand shot up, his earlier quiet mood lifting at the prospect of handling the colorful paper money. Aaliyah bounced on the bed, her braids swinging. "Can I be the dog piece? Please, Mama?" "Of course, baby." Danica set up the board on the small table while the children sorted the money and pieces. The familiar routine of the game helped push away the sting of another failed apartment viewing. She made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, cutting them into triangles the way the kids liked. The three of them played Monopoly as they ate, laughing at Aaliyah's creative property names and Luis's serious counting of rent money. Across town, in his penthouse office, Wyatt Mercer sat surrounded by open laptops and tablets. His desk was covered with research on housing discrimination cases in the city. The statistics painted a grim picture. Hundreds of complaints filed, few resulting in meaningful change. The sky outside his floor-to-ceiling windows had darkened to deep blue when his office door opened softly. Margaret Ellery entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. She'd been his assistant for 15 years, long enough to know when he needed interrupting. "I thought you might want some chamomile," she said, setting 1 cup near his hand. "You've been at this for hours." Wyatt rubbed his eyes, leaning back in his chair. "Did you know the average discrimination case takes 18 months to resolve? And that's if it's pursued at all." Margaret settled into the chair across from him, her kind face serious. "This is about the young mother and her children, isn't it? The ones from the conference room?" Her daughter asked why someone hated them. His voice was rough. No child should have to ask that question. Margaret was quiet for a moment, stirring her tea. "It reminds you of Sarah Jenkins, doesn't it?" Wyatt's hand stilled on his keyboard. Sarah Jenkins. He hadn't heard that name spoken in 30 years, but it hit him like a physical blow. "How did you—" "Your mother told me about her, years ago," Margaret said gently. "The girl whose family lived next door to you when you were 12. The ones who were evicted without cause." The memory surfaced unwanted. Sarah's tear-stained face as the police supervised their hasty departure, her little brother clutching a stuffed bear. 12-year-old Wyatt watching helplessly from his bedroom window as his best friend was forced to leave. "I wanted to help then," he said quietly. "My parents tried to intervene, but—" "You were a child," Margaret reminded him. "But you're not anymore." Wyatt stood, pacing to the window. The city lights sparkled below, beautiful and cruel. "I want to help Danica, Ms. Holt. But what if getting involved makes things worse? What if I overstep? From what I've observed of Ms. Holt, she's incredibly capable and dignified, but everyone needs support sometimes." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. The question is, what kind of man do you want to be? One who watches from windows or one who acts? Back at the motel, Danica sat on the bed with her phone, the children finally asleep beside her. She'd called 3 promising apartment listings after their game. Each conversation had followed the same pattern: initial interest, then sudden unavailability once they heard her voice or asked about her family. "I'm sorry, but we're looking for a different type of tenant. The unit was just rented, actually. We have strict occupancy limits." She set the phone down, trying to swallow past the tightness in her throat. Luis stirred in his sleep, and she smoothed his forehead gently. "Tomorrow will be better," she whispered, the same promise she'd made when tucking them in. "We'll find somewhere special, just for us." In his penthouse, Wyatt stood before the large photograph of his mother that hung in his study. Eleanor Mercer's kind eyes seemed to look right through him, just as they had in life. "I can't ignore this," he said softly to her image. "Not again." His mother had taught him that wealth meant responsibility, not just to shareholders, but to people. She'd believed in using privilege to lift others up, not build walls between them. With steady hands, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. After 3 rings, a voice answered. "James, it's Wyatt Mercer. I need you to look into some properties for me." "Yes, tonight." "And James, this needs to be handled with complete discretion." He glanced once more at his mother's photograph before beginning to outline his plans to the real estate broker. The city lights continued to sparkle beyond his windows. But tonight they seemed less cruel, more like stars offering guidance through the dark. The fluorescent lights of Mercer Innovations hummed overhead as Danica stifled another yawn. She'd been up half the night comforting Aaliyah after a nightmare, but her fingers moved steadily across her keyboard as she prepared the morning's briefing materials. The office slowly filled with the sounds of colleagues arriving, their chatter and footsteps echoing through the modern open floor plan. In his corner office, Wyatt Mercer stood by the window, watching as Danica gracefully handled a stream of questions from the marketing team. Even from this distance, he could see the shadows under her eyes, yet her smile remained genuine as she helped each person who approached her desk. The morning team briefing started at 9 o'clock sharp in the glass-walled conference room. Danica sat near the back, taking detailed notes while various department heads presented their updates. When Jerry from accounting fumbled with the projection system, she quietly rose and helped him connect to the screen without drawing attention to his struggle. Wyatt noticed everything from his position at the head of the table. How she offered her water bottle to Sarah when she coughed during her presentation. How she straightened the chairs afterward without being asked. Small acts of kindness that most people would be too tired or preoccupied to consider. After work, Danica gathered her children from the school playground. The autumn air had turned crisp, and she wrapped Luis's scarf more securely around his neck as they waited at the bus stop. The ride home would take 45 minutes with transfers, but she used the time to help Aaliyah practice her spelling words while Luis dozed against her shoulder. Meanwhile, across town, Wyatt adjusted the baseball cap pulled low over his eyes as he met James Morton, his real estate broker, outside Briggs's apartment building. He'd traded his usual tailored suit for jeans and a worn leather jacket, an outfit that would draw no second glances in this neighborhood. "Remember," Wyatt murmured as they approached the front entrance, "we're just potential investors doing a routine property inspection." James nodded, his briefcase containing carefully prepared documentation to support their cover story. When Kellen Briggs met them in the lobby, his manner was entirely different from how he'd treated Danica. He practically preened as he led them through the building, pointing out recent upgrades that looked suspiciously minimal. "And of course, we maintain a certain standard of tenant here," Briggs said with a meaningful look that made Wyatt's jaw clench. "No troublemakers or undesirables." Wyatt's fingers tightened around the pen he was pretending to take notes with. Every dismissive comment, every subtle hint of prejudice fueled his determination. As they toured the upper floors, he caught glimpses of the lives within. Children's drawings taped to refrigerators through half-open doors, elderly residents watching them pass with worried eyes, the smell of different cultural cuisines mixing in the hallways. "James," Wyatt said quietly when Briggs stepped away to take a phone call. "Make the offer, whatever it takes." Back at the motel, Danica balanced her phone against her shoulder as she stirred a pot of macaroni and cheese on the room's small hot plate. The kids sat cross-legged on one of the beds, homework spread around them. "Yes, I understand," she said softly into the phone, her heart sinking as yet another property manager delivered rejection wrapped in polite excuses. "Thank you for your time." She ended the call and took a deep breath before turning to her children with a bright smile. "Who's hungry?" Across town in his penthouse office, Wyatt sat at his desk, pen hovering over the final document. The purchase agreement for Briggs's building lay before him, the price eye-watering even by his standards. But money had never been the point. "Is everything in order, Mr. Mercer?" James asked, standing respectfully to the side. Wyatt signed his name with a decisive stroke. "Perfect. Make sure the transition happens quietly. I don't want anyone displaced or alarmed by the change in ownership." Later that night, Danica sat between her children's beds, a worn copy of The Little Engine That Could open in her lap. The story had been Aaliyah's favorite since she was 3, and even now at 8 years old, she still requested it when feeling uncertain. "I think I can. I think I can," Danica read, her voice warm and steady despite her exhaustion. The little blue engine never gave up, even when the hill seemed too steep. Luis was already asleep, his small hand curled around his sister's stuffed giraffe. Aaliyah fought to keep her eyes open, but eventually succumbed to sleep as well. Danica carefully tucked the blankets around them both, placing gentle kisses on their foreheads. On his penthouse balcony, Wyatt stood in the cool night air, looking out over the city he'd helped build. The signed papers sat on his desk inside, representing more than just a property acquisition. Tomorrow would bring changes, but tonight the city slept, unaware of the quiet shifts taking place in its fabric. His hands rested on the glass barrier as he watched the traffic flowing far below, streams of headlights marking the arteries of the city. The same determination that had built his company from nothing now focused on a different kind of problem, one that couldn't be solved with technology or innovation alone. The night air carried the distant sounds of the city: sirens, traffic, the occasional burst of laughter from other balconies. Wyatt remained still, his resolution solidifying with each passing moment. Tomorrow would be time for action, for taking the first steps toward real change. But for now, he stood guard over the sleeping city, as if his vigilance alone could protect all those who, like Danica and her children, deserved so much better than what they'd been given. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, as Danica helped Luis tie his sneakers in their motel room. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected sender, Wyatt Mercer himself. "Would you and your children be available to join me for a community partnership meeting this morning? I understand it's the weekend, but your perspective would be valuable." Danica's hands trembled slightly as she read the message. The CEO of Mercer Innovations wanted her input? She glanced at her children, who were already dressed and watching cartoons on the small motel television. "Kids," she said carefully, "how would you feel about going to a special meeting with Mommy's boss? Will there be snacks?" Luis asked hopefully, making Aaliyah giggle. "I'm not sure, baby," Danica replied, typing a response with nervous fingers. "But we'll make sure to eat breakfast first." They took the bus across town, Danica smoothing her skirt repeatedly as her mind raced with possibilities. What kind of meeting could this be? When they arrived at the designated address, she stopped short, her heart skipping a beat. They were standing in front of Briggs's apartment building. "Ms. Holt." Wyatt's warm voice came from behind them. He approached wearing a casual weekend suit, his usual formality softened by a gentle smile. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Mercer," she started, instinctively pulling her children closer. "I don't understand. Please," he said. "Call me Wyatt." He knelt down to the children's eye level. "And you must be Luis and Aaliyah. I heard you're excellent artists." The children shifted shyly behind their mother, but Wyatt's kind demeanor drew small smiles from both of them. "I have something to show you," he continued, standing and gesturing toward the building's entrance. "And I promise it's worth your time." As they approached the front doors, Danica's anxiety mounted. The last time she'd been here had left deep wounds. Wyatt must have sensed her hesitation because he paused, turning to face her, directly. "Danica," he said softly, "I want you to know that things have changed here. This building has a new owner." She blinked, confused. "A new owner?" "Yes." His eyes held steady. "Me." The words took a moment to register. When they did, Danica's hand flew to her mouth. Before she could respond, the lobby doors burst open and Kellen Briggs stormed out, his face red with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, glaring at Danica and her children. "I told you—" "Mr. Briggs." Wyatt's voice cut through the air like steel, all warmth gone. "I believe you owe this family an apology." Briggs sputtered, looking between Wyatt and Danica. "I don't—" "An apology," Wyatt repeated firmly, "for your discriminatory behavior and unprofessional conduct. These children deserve to hear it." The silence stretched taut as Briggs struggled visibly with his pride. Finally, through clenched teeth, he muttered, "I apologize for my previous behavior." Danica stood frozen, one hand on each of her children's shoulders, hardly daring to breathe. Wyatt nodded curtly to Briggs, dismissing him, before turning back to her, with his earlier gentleness restored. "There are several units available," he said. "Would you like to see them?" Tears pricked at Danica's eyes as she nodded. They followed Wyatt into the building, past the lobby where she'd once been humiliated, into an elevator that carried them to the 4th floor. The hallways were clean and bright, sunlight streaming through large windows. Wyatt stopped at apartment 412, producing a key. This one just became available. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, and a view of the park. He unlocked the door and stepped aside, allowing Danica and her children to enter first. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and lemon cleaner. Sunlight poured through wide windows, illuminating hardwood floors and freshly painted walls. The kitchen gleamed with new appliances, and a breakfast nook offered the promised view of green treetops in the nearby park. "Mommy!" Aaliyah gasped, running to the windows. "Look at all the trees." Luis had already discovered the bedrooms, his excited voice carrying back to them. "There's space for my dinosaur collection." Danica stood in the middle of the living room, overwhelmed by emotion. This space, so full of light and possibility, was everything she'd dreamed of providing for her children. She turned to thank Wyatt, but found he had stepped back into the hallway, giving them privacy to explore their potential new home. Through the open door, she could hear voices in the corridor, unfamiliar ones asking questions about property transfers and community development. Reporters, she realized, already catching wind of the change in ownership. But in this moment, watching her children's joy as they discovered each new corner of the apartment, those voices seemed distant and unimportant. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting warm patches on the floor where her children danced with excitement, their shadows playing across walls that could soon be home. Monday morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the dusty windows, of room 17 at the Parkview Motel. Danica folded the last of their clothes into a worn suitcase, her movements careful and deliberate. The children had barely slept, too excited about their new home to settle down the night before. "Mummy, can I have the room with the big window?" Aaliyah bounced on her toes, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. "No fair," Louise protested. "I want that one." "We'll figure it out when we get there," Danica promised, zipping the suitcase closed. She checked her phone. 7:30 in the morning. They had just enough time to catch the bus. But when they stepped outside, a moving truck was waiting in the parking lot. Two men in crisp uniforms approached with friendly smiles. "Ms. Holt, Mr. Mercer sent us to help with your move." Heat rushed to Danica's cheeks. "Oh, that's really not necessary." "Please, Mom," one of the movers said kindly. "It's already arranged. Let us handle the heavy lifting." The children watched in amazement as the professionals efficiently loaded their few belongings into the truck. Louisa's eyes went wide when they carefully secured his box of precious dinosaur figures with special padding. During the short drive to their new apartment, Danica's emotions swirled between gratitude and embarrassment. She wasn't used to accepting help, especially not from her employer. But watching her children's excited faces in the rearview mirror, she pushed her pride aside. The movers worked quickly, bringing everything up to apartment 412 while the kids raced from room to room, their footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. "I called it first," Aaliyah declared, standing in the doorway of the bedroom with the park view. "But I'm older," Louise argued. Danica stepped between them. "How about we take turns, switch rooms every 6 months?" Both children considered this, then nodded solemnly. Aaliyah won the first choice with a game of rock, paper, scissors, and Louise graciously accepted the other bedroom, quickly discovering it had better closet space for his growing collection. By mid-morning, word had spread through Mercer Innovations. Danica's phone buzzed constantly with messages from co-workers. "Did Wyatt Mercer really buy an apartment building for you? Is it true about the CEO helping you? What happened with Briggs?" She left them unanswered, focusing instead on unpacking boxes and arranging their modest furniture. The children helped by organizing their toys and books, creating their own special corners in their new space. As afternoon faded into evening, Danica was hanging curtains when she noticed a news van parking across the street. Her stomach clenched as a reporter and cameraman emerged, equipment in hand. Through the window, she watched them interviewing neighbors, presumably about the sudden change in building ownership. The flash of a camera made her step back quickly from the window. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Wyatt. "Saw the news van, on my way." Before she could reply, she heard the distinctive purr of his luxury car pulling up outside. Through the window, she watched him step out, his tall figure commanding immediate attention. The reporters converged on him, microphones extended. The building's security buzzer sounded moments later. When she opened the door, Wyatt stood there, slightly disheveled but determined. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. "They're quite persistent out there." Danica nodded, stepping aside. The children looked up from their coloring books, waving cheerfully at him from the kitchen table. "Hi, Mr. Wyatt," Aaliyah called out. "Want to see my new room?" "Perhaps another time." He smiled warmly. "Right now I need to speak with your mother." Danica put on the kettle while Wyatt stood by the window, watching the reporters below. Neither spoke until she placed 2 steaming mugs of tea on the kitchen table. "I'm sorry about this," he said finally, settling into a chair. "I should have anticipated the media attention." "It's not your fault," Danica replied, though her hands trembled slightly around her mug. "But I don't know how to handle this kind of spotlight." "You don't have to," Wyatt assured her. "You don't owe them any statements or interviews. This will blow over." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping tea while the children played quietly in their rooms. The sky outside deepened to purple, then navy blue, streetlights flickering on one by one. "I want you to know," Danica began hesitantly, "how grateful we are. But I also need to establish some boundaries. I can't have my co-workers thinking that you received special treatment." Wyatt finished gently. "Danica, what happened here wasn't special treatment. It was correcting an injustice. You earned this apartment fairly. I simply removed the obstacle of discrimination." His words settled over her like a warm blanket, easing some of her anxiety. By the time he left, the children were already asleep in their new rooms, content and secure for the first time in weeks. Alone in her living room, Danica turned on the television just in time to see her own name scroll across the bottom of the screen. The reporter she'd seen earlier stood outside the building, speaking into a microphone. "Sources say the CEO of Mercer Innovations purchased this entire apartment complex after learning about discriminatory practices against one of his employees, single mother Danica Holt." Her heart raced as her story unfolded on screen, complete with photos of her and her children entering the building earlier that day. She quickly turned off the TV, her hands shaking. Privacy had always been her shield, her way of protecting her children. Now their story was out there for everyone to see. In the quiet of her new apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the soft sounds of her sleeping children, Danica wrapped her arms around herself and tried to breathe through the fear of such public exposure. The city lights twinkled through her new curtains, beautiful but somehow threatening now that they carried the weight of unwanted attention. The morning sun barely peeked through the clouds as Danica scrolled through her phone, her coffee growing cold beside her. Her hands trembled as she read comment after comment on social media about her situation. So inspiring, a CEO who actually cares about his employees. Mercer hero. Single mum gets handout from billionaire boss. What's really going on there? This is what real change looks like, standing up against housing discrimination. She's probably just playing the race card for attention. Danica quickly closed the app, her stomach churning. She hadn't asked for any of this attention. The walk to school with Luis and Aaliyah felt different today. People on the street did double takes, whispering and pointing. One woman even took out her phone to snap a picture. "Mommy, why are people looking at us?" Aaliyah asked, gripping Danica's hand tighter. "Sometimes people are just curious, sweetie," Danica answered softly, pulling her children closer. "Let's focus on getting you to school, okay?" After dropping them off, she walked to Mercer Innovations, keeping her head down. Still, she heard the whispers. A coffee shop barista did a visible double-take when she passed by. A man waiting at the crosswalk nudged his friend and pointed. The office buzzed with unusual energy when she arrived. Minutes later, an email arrived announcing a company-wide meeting in the main conference room. Danica's heart pounded as she took a seat near the back, trying to make herself invisible. Wyatt stood at the front, his presence commanding attention. He looked sharp in his charcoal suit, but Danica noticed the slight shadows under his eyes. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady and clear. "Today, I'm announcing a new initiative at Mercer Innovations. We're establishing a housing advocacy program to combat discrimination in our city's rental market." He outlined the program's details: legal support for victims of housing discrimination, partnerships with fair housing organizations, and a commitment to exposing predatory landlords. Throughout the presentation, he never once mentioned Danica or the events that sparked this change, for which she was deeply grateful. "This isn't just about business," Wyatt continued, his eyes briefly meeting Danica's. "It's about human dignity, about ensuring every family has a fair chance at finding a home." Across town, in a dimly lit office, Kellen Briggs sat at his desk, phone pressed to his ear. His face was red with anger as he spoke to fellow members of the Landlords Association network. "This bleeding heart billionaire thinks he can change how we do business?" He snarled. "We need to shut this down before it spreads. I've got dirt on that woman. Single mother, probably can't even afford the rent long term. We make this public, make her look bad. The whole thing falls apart." The day dragged on endlessly for Danica. By evening, when she finally closed her apartment door behind her, she felt exhausted to her bones. While the kids did their homework, she opened her laptop to check her email. Her inbox was flooded with messages from strangers. Some were supportive, but others, gold digger, looking for handouts. Go back where you came from. She slammed the laptop shut, fighting back tears. Her phone rang. Wyatt's number. "Danica, I wanted to check how you're holding up." His voice was gentle, concerned. Something in her cracked. "I can't handle this," she whispered, moving to her bedroom so the children wouldn't hear. "People are taking pictures of us on the street. The messages, they're so hateful. I never wanted any of this attention." "I know," Wyatt said softly. "I'm sorry. We can hire security if you'd feel safer. No more special treatment. That'll just make it worse." She wiped her eyes. I just wanted a home for my children." After they hung up, Danica sat at her kitchen table, spreading out bills in the dim light. Rent would be due soon, affordable now, but still a significant portion of her income. Medical bills from Luis's asthma treatment, school supplies they needed. The numbers swam before her eyes. Down the hall she could hear her children's peaceful breathing as they slept in their new rooms. Aaliyah had hung paper butterflies from her ceiling. Luis had arranged his books carefully on his new shelf. They were finally home, finally safe. Danica closed her eyes, folding her hands together. "Lord," she whispered into the quiet apartment, "give me strength. Help me weather this storm. Keep my children safe from all this ugliness. Help me find the courage to face tomorrow." The city lights twinkled outside her window, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. But here, in this moment, her children slept peacefully in their beds. And that had to be enough. On Wednesday morning, Wyatt found himself lingering in Danica's doorway, watching Luis struggle with a small robot kit spread across the dining table. The 9-year-old's forehead wrinkled in concentration as he consulted the instruction manual. "Need a hand with that?" Wyatt asked softly, careful not to startle him. Luis looked up, eyes widening slightly. "It's for school," he explained. "We're supposed to build a robot that can move on its own, but—" He gestured at the scattered parts helplessly. "Mind if I take a look?" Wyatt stepped inside, setting his briefcase down. He rolled up his sleeves and pulled out a chair. Danica emerged from the kitchen, surprise flickering across her face. "Mr. Mercer, you don't have to—" "Please, just Wyatt," he said, already examining the robot's main circuit board. "And I want to. I actually started my company building things like this in my garage." For the next hour, Wyatt guided Luis through the assembly process, explaining each component with patience and clarity. He noticed how quickly the boy caught on, his initial shyness melting away as they worked together. "See how these wires connect?" Wyatt demonstrated, his hands steady. "The positive wire goes to this terminal, and the negative to this one, like a puzzle piece finding its home." Luis's face lit up when they finally got the robot to move across the table. "Mom, look!" he called out excitedly. "We did it!" Danica watched from the kitchen, something warm unfurling in her chest at the sight of her usually reserved son chattering animatedly with Wyatt about programming and circuits. That evening, as Wyatt prepared to leave, 7-year-old Aaliyah tugged at his sleeve. "Will you read me a story?" she asked, holding up a well-worn book of fairy tales. "Please. Mommy says you have to go, but just one?" Wyatt hesitated, glancing at Danica. She nodded slightly, and he found himself settling into the small chair beside Aaliyah's bed. The princess lived in a tall tower, he began, his deep voice softening as he read. Aaliyah snuggled closer, pointing at the illustrations and asking questions. By the story's end, her eyelids were drooping. The next evening, Wyatt returned with a new robotics kit for Luis and another story for Aaliyah. This time, he brought dinner too, simple takeout that made the children beam with delight. Meanwhile, across town, Kellen Briggs hunched over his computer screen, a satisfied smirk playing across his face. "Look at this," he said to the other landlords gathered in his office. On the screen, security footage showed Danica apparently arguing with another tenant, her gestures aggressive. "It's perfect," one of the landlords said. "We edit this right, add some context about her being violent with other tenants, and her whole victim story falls apart. I've got contacts at 3 news stations." Another added, "Once this hits the media, Mercer's whole housing initiative loses credibility. No one will want to rent to her type after this." The footage was heavily doctored, pieced together from different days, altered to make Danica appear confrontational when she'd actually been helping an elderly neighbor with groceries. But the manipulation was subtle, professional. On Thursday evening, Danica sat on her couch, television tuned to the local news. Wyatt stood at a podium outside Mercer Innovations headquarters, cameras flashing. "Today I'm proud to announce the expansion of our housing advocacy program," he stated, his voice steady and powerful. "We're launching new initiatives specifically designed to support single parents in our community. This includes affordable childcare facilities in our properties, after-school programs, and flexible payment options." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "This program was inspired by someone who showed me what true courage looks like. Someone who faced discrimination with dignity and grace, who put her children's needs above her own comfort, who reminded me that one person's story can change countless lives." Danica pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling up. Though he never mentioned her name, she felt the weight of his words, the respect in his voice. "We're not just building apartments," Wyatt continued. "We're building communities, places where every family, regardless of their background, can feel safe, valued, and at home." The press conference ended with announcements of partnerships with local organizations and plans for future developments. Danica noticed how carefully Wyatt had crafted his message, highlighting the initiative's impact while protecting her privacy. Outside, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Luis and Aaliyah pressed their faces against the window, watching the sky darken. "Mom," Aaliyah called out, "is Wyatt coming to read tonight? He promised to finish the story about the brave knight." "I don't know, sweetheart," Danica replied, watching the storm approach. "The weather's getting pretty bad." Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the city in stark white. The wind picked up, rattling the windows as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. The storm's intensity matched the building tension in the city. Somewhere in a news station, Briggs's doctored footage sat waiting to be aired. But for now, Danica and her children were safe in their home, their lives touched by unexpected kindness, their future still unfolding. Luis's robot whirred quietly across the coffee table, a small reminder of connection and hope. Aaliyah hugged her new book of stories close, while Danica gazed out at the darkening sky, grateful for the shelter of walls that held more than just her family. They held the promise of change. Dawn brought a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Danica's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications as the doctored security footage spread across social media like wildfire. Her hands shook as she watched the video, barely recognizing the angry, aggressive woman it portrayed her to be. "That's not me," she whispered, watching the altered scenes play out. "That never happened." Outside her building, voices grew louder. Peering through her curtains, Danica's heart sank at the sight of protesters gathering on the sidewalk. They carried hastily made signs with cruel messages. No special treatment. Stop playing the victim. And worse, some had megaphones, their angry voices carrying up to her third-floor apartment. Louise appeared beside her, backpack in hand. "Mum, are we going to be late for school?" Danica pulled him away from the window, her protective instincts kicking in. "Baby, I think we're going to stay home today." She sent quick texts to both teachers, explaining her children wouldn't be attending due to security concerns. Aaliyah wandered in, still in her pajamas. "Why are people yelling outside?" Before Danica could answer, someone threw something at their window. It didn't break the glass, but the thud made both children jump. Tears sprang to Danica's eyes as she herded them toward the back bedroom, away from the windows. With trembling fingers, she dialed Wyatt's number. "I'm sorry," she choked out when he answered. "I didn't know who else to call. There are people outside, and this horrible video, and I can't—" Her voice broke. "I'm on my way," Wyatt said immediately. "Keep the doors locked. Don't answer for anyone but me." While they waited, Danica tried to keep the children calm. She put on their favorite cartoon and made hot chocolate, but her own hands shook so badly she spilled some on the counter. The shouts from outside grew louder. 20 minutes later, Wyatt knocked their special pattern. 3 quick taps, 2 slow. Danica checked the peephole before letting him in. His face was tight with anger, but it softened when he saw her tear-stained face. "I saw the footage," he said, closing the door behind him. "It's obviously fake. We'll prove it." "They're saying I manipulated you," Danica said quietly. "That I played some kind of victim card to get special treatment." Wyatt moved toward the children, who were huddled on the couch. "Hey guys," he said gently. "How about we build that new robot kit I brought, the one that can climb walls?" Their faces brightened slightly, and Wyatt sat with them, helping them open the package. He kept his movements calm and steady, though Danica could see the tension in his shoulders. Another knock came at the door, this one official-sounding. Danica's heart nearly stopped when she looked through the peephole. 2 women in business attire stood outside, holding clipboards. "Ms. Holt," one called through the door. "This is Catherine Martinez from Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you regarding an anonymous report." The room seemed to spin. Danica looked at Wyatt in panic. He stood immediately, but she shook her head. Making CPS wait would only make things worse. With dread weighing down her every movement, Danica opened the door. The social workers entered, their eyes taking in everything: the dishes in the sink, the children's toys on the floor, Wyatt's presence. "Mr. Mercer," the second social worker said, recognition crossing her face. "We'll need to speak with Ms. Holt privately." Wyatt stepped forward. "I'm her employer and can vouch for—" "Sir," Catherine interrupted firmly, "this is a confidential matter. Please wait outside." The next hour was torture. The social workers questioned Danica about her parenting, her work schedule, her relationship with Wyatt. They asked about the children's fathers, about her income, about why she'd kept them home from school. They took photos of the apartment and interviewed each child separately. Through it all, Danica maintained her composure, answering truthfully and completely, but inside, something was breaking. When they finally left, promising to be in touch, Danica closed the door and slid down against it. Her chest heaved with sobs she'd been holding back for hours. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I want to disappear. My babies don't deserve this. They were happy before, even in that tiny motel room. At least they were safe." Wyatt stood in the middle of her living room, looking more lost than she'd ever seen him. The confident CEO was gone, replaced by a man drowning in guilt. "This is my fault," he said, his voice rough. "I thought I could help, but I've only made everything worse. I should have found a quieter way, should have protected you better." The children had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from the stress of the day. Outside, the protesters' voices had finally begun to fade as evening approached. Wyatt looked at Danica, still huddled against the door, then at the sleeping children. His expression was haunted. Without another word, he gathered his coat and headed for the door. Danica didn't try to stop him. She watched through tear-blurred eyes as he slipped out quietly, his shoulders heavy with the weight of unspoken regret. The click of the door closing echoed in the sudden silence, and Danica felt more alone than ever before. The apartment grew dark as night fell, but she couldn't bring herself to turn on the lights. She simply sat there, listening to her children's steady breathing, wondering how trying to find a safe home for her family had turned into such a nightmare. Monday morning arrived with a heavy grey sky that matched Danica's mood perfectly. She got the children ready for school mechanically, trying to smile for them even as worry gnawed at her insides. The social workers hadn't called yet, and every ring of her phone made her jump. "Mummy, are you mad at Mr. Wyatt?" Aaliyah asked as they waited for the bus. "He didn't come read stories last night." Danica's heart clenched. "No, sweetheart. Mr. Wyatt is just very busy with work." At Mercer Innovations, Danica kept her head down, taking a different route to avoid passing Wyatt's office. She'd seen his car in the parking garage and felt a complicated mix of relief and anxiety. At least he was okay. Throughout the day, concerned co-workers stopped by her desk. Sarah from accounting brought coffee. James from IT offered to walk her to her car. Teresa suggested starting a support group. Each time, Danica politely declined, mustering a weak smile. "Thank you, but we're fine," became her mantra. Every kind gesture felt dangerous now. Who else might twist it into something ugly? 3 floors up, Wyatt sat in his darkened office, staring at an untouched stack of papers. His assistant Margaret had already rescheduled 2 board meetings and declined 4 interview requests. The business news channels were having a field day speculating about his unusual behavior. Tuesday passed in much the same way. Danica focused on her work, picked up the kids, helped with homework, made dinner. Normal things that felt anything but normal now. Wyatt remained sequestered in his office, emerging only for essential signatures. By Wednesday evening, Danica felt like she was suffocating under the weight of it all. After putting the children to bed, she grabbed her Bible and slipped out, leaving her neighbor, Ms. Johnson, to watch over them. The evening service at New Hope Baptist had already started when she arrived, but Pastor Williams spotted her immediately. The familiar hymns washed over her as she sat in the back pew, tears sliding silently down her face. When the service ended, she stayed seated, unable to move. Pastor Williams and the church elders gathered around her without a word. "Child," Elder Sarah said softly, placing a weathered hand on Danica's shoulder, "you've been carrying this burden alone too long." "We've been watching the news," Pastor Williams added, "and more importantly, we've been praying for you." Danica broke down then, telling them everything: the fake footage, the protests, the social workers, her fear for her children, her guilt about Wyatt's help backfiring so terribly. The elders listened, nodding with understanding. When she finished, they formed a circle around her, their hands gentle on her shoulders. "Lord," Pastor Williams prayed, his deep voice steady and sure, "we lift up our sister Danica. You see her heart, her struggles, her love for her children. Remind her that she is never alone, that you walk beside her through every valley." As they prayed, Danica felt something loosen in her chest. The burden didn't disappear, but it felt lighter somehow, shared among these faithful friends who had known her since childhood. Meanwhile, across town, in an elegant study filled with law books, Judge Howard Sinclair watched his former protégé pace back and forth. "Sit down, Wyatt," the judge said firmly. "You're wearing a hole in my carpet." Wyatt dropped heavily into a leather armchair. "I should have handled it differently, Howard. I've made her life worse." Judge Sinclair leaned forward, his eyes sharp despite his advanced years. "Do you remember the first housing discrimination case we worked on together? The protests outside the courthouse? The death threats?" "That was different. It was exactly the same," the judge interrupted. "Anytime you challenge an unjust system, there will be backlash. The people benefiting from that system will fight to maintain it. But retreating is the worst possible response." Wyatt ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I'm not retreating. I'm trying to protect her." "By hiding in your office? By letting those landlords control the narrative?" Judge Sinclair's voice softened. "Son, I've known you since you were a bright-eyed law student. You've never backed down from a fight before. Don't start now." The judge's words hit home. Wyatt thought about Danica's quiet strength, her children's resilient smiles. He thought about his own mother, who had taught him to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. Back in her apartment, Danica sat by the window after putting the kids to bed. The street below was finally quiet, no protesters in sight. She held her mother's old Bible, remembering the wisdom she'd been raised with. "Keep your head up," her mother used to say. "God didn't give you that backbone for nothing." The memory brought fresh determination. She wouldn't let fear win. She wouldn't let her children see her defeated. Whatever came next, she would face it with the dignity and grace her mother had taught her. Across the city, in his penthouse office, Wyatt stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows. Judge Sinclair's words echoed in his mind as he looked out over the city lights. He had started this fight for justice, not just for Danica, but for everyone who had ever faced discrimination in housing. Running away now would only prove the critics right. He pulled out his phone and began making calls. It was time to fight back, the right way this time. In two different parts of the city, both Danica and Wyatt came to the same resolution. They would make this right, not just for themselves, but for every family that might face the same struggles in the future. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were both determined to walk it with courage and conviction. The morning sun had barely risen when Danica's phone buzzed with an unexpected message. Her heart skipped a beat as she read it. "Ms. Holt, I used to work for Kellen Briggs. I have information that could help you. Can we meet somewhere private? James." She stared at the message while Luis and Aaliyah finished their cereal, her mind racing. After dropping the kids at school, she responded carefully, suggesting a coffee shop on the other side of town called The Daily Grind. 4:30 this afternoon, she typed. "I'll be wearing a blue sweater." The reply came quickly. "I'll be there, thank you." Across town, Wyatt Mercer sat in his office's conference room, surrounded by his legal team. Judge Sinclair's words from the previous evening had lit a fire in him. 5 lawyers spread documents across the massive oak table, reviewing years of housing complaints. "Look at this pattern." Sarah Chen, his head counsel, pointed to a map dotted with red markers. "Every rejection of minority applicants follows the same timeline, the same excuses. It's not just Briggs, it's coordinated." Wyatt leaned forward, his jaw set. "We need more concrete evidence, records, testimonies, anything that proves deliberate discrimination." The morning stretched into afternoon as they built their case. But something was still missing, the smoking gun that would make it impossible for the landlords to deny their actions. At 4:15, Danica walked into the Daily Grind, her heart pounding. She chose a corner table with a clear view of both exits, just as her father had taught her. At 4:28, a young man in wrinkled business clothes entered, glancing nervously around the shop. "Ms. Holt?" he asked quietly, approaching her table. "I'm James. I worked as Briggs's assistant manager for 8 months." Danica gestured to the empty chair. "Please, sit down. Would you like some coffee?" James shook his head, his hands trembling slightly as he placed a USB drive and a manila envelope on the table. "I can't stay long, but I couldn't keep quiet anymore." "What made you decide to help?" Danica asked gently. James stared at his hands. "My grandmother raised me. She faced the same thing you did 30 years ago. Different landlord, same story. When I saw what they did to you, how they doctored that footage." He took a shaky breath. "I have the real security footage, and documents, records of their meetings, emails between landlords coordinating their discrimination policies. They called it tenant optimization, but it was pure racism." Danica's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. This could change everything. "They'll know it was me," James whispered. "But I don't care anymore. What they're doing, what I help them do, it's wrong. My grandmother would be ashamed of me if I stayed silent." "Thank you," Danica said, reaching across to squeeze his hand. "This took real courage." After James left, Danica found a quiet corner and called Wyatt. Her voice shook with excitement as she told him about the meeting. "Can you come over tonight?" she asked. "We need to look at this together." "I'll be there at 7. Wyatt replied, relief evident in his voice. "Danica, thank you for letting me help again." At 7 o'clock sharp, Wyatt knocked on her apartment door. Luis and Aaliyah were already in bed, tired from a long day at school. Danica had cleared the living room coffee table, and now they spread out the documents from James's envelope. "Oh my God," Wyatt breathed, scanning the emails. "They've been coordinating this for years. Monthly meetings to share lists of undesirable applicants, coded language about maintaining neighborhood standards." Danica plugged the USB drive into her laptop. The security footage played, showing her interaction with Briggs exactly as it had happened. No aggression, no threats, just a mother and her children being turned away because of their race. "Look at this." She pointed to a spreadsheet. They tracked every application they rejected, categorized by race. They even calculated quotas to maintain what they called demographic balance. They worked late into the night, organizing the evidence into a clear narrative. Wyatt's legal training helped them identify the strongest pieces for the upcoming public hearing. "We need to make copies," Wyatt said, running a hand through his hair. "Multiple copies, stored in different locations. They'll try to discredit this, maybe even try to make it disappear." Danica nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "We should give copies to the media too, but not until the hearing. We need the landlords to walk into that room thinking they're still in control." Together they crafted a plan for the hearing. Wyatt would present the statistical evidence first, laying out the pattern of discrimination. Then they would reveal the emails and meeting minutes showing the coordination between landlords. Finally, they would play the real security footage, destroying the false narrative Briggs had created. "Are you ready for this?" Wyatt asked softly. "Once we start, there's no going back. They'll come at us with everything they have." Danica looked around her apartment, the home she had fought so hard to secure for her children. She thought about other families still facing closed doors and hollow excuses. "I'm ready," she said firmly. "These men have been hurting families for decades. It's time someone stood up to them." They worked until midnight, making detailed notes and organizing their presentation. The evidence was overwhelming once laid out in full, a decades-long conspiracy of discrimination hiding behind respectability and legal loopholes. "We've got them," Wyatt said, gathering the documents carefully. "This time we've really got them." Danica walked him to the door, both of them exhausted but energized by hope. They had the truth on their side now, documented and undeniable. The public hearing would be their chance to expose everything, to finally bring justice to families who had been silently suffering for years. The morning sun cast long shadows across the city as Wyatt's car pulled up to Morrison & Associates, one of the most respected law firms downtown. Danica smoothed her navy blue blazer, a gift from her church community for the hearing, and took a deep breath. Sarah Morrison is the best civil rights attorney in the state, Wyatt explained as they walked through the pristine glass doors. She's won cases like this before. The conference room buzzed with activity. Sarah Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, had already spread their evidence across the polished table. 3 junior attorneys worked nearby, highlighting documents and making notes. Mrs. Holt. Sarah greeted warmly, extending her hand. I've reviewed everything. What these landlords have been doing is textbook discrimination. We're going to make sure everyone knows it. For the next 2 hours, they prepared for the hearing. Sarah drilled Danica on potential questions, teaching her to stay calm and focused even under aggressive questioning. Remember, Sarah advised, speak from your heart, but stick to the facts. Your story matters, but the evidence is what will nail them. At 11:30, they gathered their materials and headed to the courthouse. Danica had dropped Luis and Aaliyah off at school earlier, hugging them extra tight. Be brave today, Mommy, Aaliyah had whispered, and those words echoed in Danica's mind now. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and camera crews. Wyatt stayed close to Danica's right side, while Sarah flanked her left, creating a protective barrier. Microphones thrust towards them as questions flew. Mrs. Holt, what evidence do you have? Mr. Mercer, why are you personally involved in this case? Is this a publicity stunt for Mercer Innovations? Danica kept her head high, just as Sarah had coached her. The clicking cameras and shouted questions felt distant as she focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Inside the courthouse lobby, more reporters waited, but security kept them at bay. Wyatt noticed Danica's hands trembling as she signed in at the security desk. You're not alone, he said quietly, his voice steady and reassuring. We've got the truth on our side. They were directed to a small conference room for the pre-hearing briefing. Sarah spread out their presentation materials while her team reviewed last-minute details. Danica practiced her opening statement, her voice growing stronger with each repetition. When they try to discredit you, Sarah warned, remember, stay calm. Let the evidence speak for itself. We have the real security footage. We have their own emails proving coordination, and we have years of discriminatory rejection data. They can't argue with math. At 2 o'clock, they broke for a quick lunch. Danica could barely eat, but Wyatt insisted she try the sandwich he'd brought for her. You'll need your strength, he reminded her gently. The afternoon stretched on with more preparation. They reviewed every document, practiced responses to potential challenges, and fine-tuned their presentation order. Sarah's team had created clear visual aids to help the commission understand the patterns of discrimination. By 5:30, they were as ready as they could be. Wyatt drove Danica home, where Mrs. Johnson from church had been watching the children. The kids ran to hug their mother as soon as she walked in. Did you tell them about the bad men today, Mommy? Luis asked. Tomorrow, Danica explained, kissing his forehead. Tomorrow we tell everyone the truth. After dinner, Wyatt stayed to help Danica practice one last time. They sat at her kitchen table, going through her testimony point by point. Unknown to them, Luis and Aaliyah crept quietly into the hallway, listening intently as their mother's voice grew stronger and more confident with each run-through. Tell them about how the man wouldn't even let us see inside, Aaliyah whispered to her brother. Mommy's going to make it right. Shh, Luis replied, but he was smiling proudly. In the kitchen, Danica stood straight and spoke clearly. The pattern of discrimination isn't just about my family. It's about dozens of families who have been denied homes unfairly. The evidence shows a coordinated effort to exclude people based on race, hidden behind excuses and false paperwork. This has to stop. Perfect, Wyatt said softly. Just like that. At 9 o'clock, after the children were in bed, Danica sat at her kitchen table with the evidence spread before her. She had 12 fresh folders, labeled neatly with tabs for each section of their presentation. One by one, she filled them with copies of emails, spreadsheets, meeting minutes, and the USB drive containing the real security footage. Her hands moved steadily now, no longer shaking. Tomorrow would change everything, not just for her family, but for every family who had ever been told, "Sorry, it's already rented," or "You wouldn't be comfortable in this neighborhood." The final folder contained her personal statement. She read it one last time before slipping it inside. "My children deserve to live in a world where doors aren't closed before they even reach them. Every family deserves that chance. That's why I'm here today, not just for my children, but for every child who has watched their parents face rejection because of the color of their skin." The evidence we're presenting proves this discrimination isn't isolated or accidental. It's systematic, deliberate, and it must end. She stacked the folders precisely, ready for morning. Each one represented a piece of truth that could no longer be hidden or denied. Tomorrow, that truth would finally be heard. The morning sky hung heavy with grey clouds as Danica stood before her mirror, smoothing her navy blazer. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened her mother's silver cross necklace, a touchstone of strength for this crucial day. Wyatt arrived precisely at 7:15, his black Tesla quietly pulling up outside her building. He stepped out, impeccable in a charcoal suit, his usual confident demeanor tempered by the gravity of the moment. "Good morning," he said softly as Danica emerged with her children. "Are you ready?" Mrs. Johnson from church was already waiting to take Luis and Aaliyah to school. The children hugged their mother tightly. "You're going to do great, Mommy," Aaliyah whispered. The drive to the courthouse was quiet, both Danica and Wyatt lost in their thoughts. Early morning traffic moved sluggishly through the misty streets as they approached downtown. Police barricades were already set up, and news vans lined the curb. "Remember," Wyatt said as they pulled into the reserved parking space, "just tell your truth. That's all you need to do." They entered through a side entrance, avoiding the growing crowd of reporters at the main steps. Sarah, their attorney, met them in the lobby, her team already setting up in the hearing room. The oak-paneled chamber felt impossibly large as they arranged their evidence folders on the presentation table. By 8:30, people began filing in. Community activists, housing advocates, and concerned citizens filled the public seating area. Journalists jockeyed for position along the back wall, their cameras ready. The 5-member Housing Commission entered, taking their seats at the elevated bench. At 8:45, Kellen Briggs strutted in with 3 lawyers, carrying expensive leather briefcases. He caught Danica's eye and smirked, clearly believing his legal team would easily discredit her. Wyatt noticed Danica's hands clench beneath the table and quietly placed a bottle of water in front of her. Commission Chairwoman Eleanor Martinez called the hearing to order precisely at 9 o'clock. "We are here today to address serious allegations of systemic housing discrimination," she began, her voice firm and clear. "Ms. Holt, please step forward to give your testimony." Danica rose slowly, smoothing her skirt. The room fell silent as she walked to the podium. Under the bright lights, she could feel hundreds of eyes watching. She took a deep breath, unfolded her prepared statement, and began to speak. "My name is Danica Holt," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm a single mother of 2 beautiful children. 3 months ago, I had saved enough for a deposit on an apartment in Mr. Briggs's building. I had excellent credit, steady employment, and met all the posted requirements. But Mr. Briggs wouldn't even show us the unit once he saw my face. She continued, describing that painful morning in detail. The confusion in her children's eyes, the humiliation of being dismissed without cause, the long bus ride home in silence. Her voice cracked slightly when she spoke of trying to explain discrimination to her kids that night, but she pressed on. What happened to my family wasn't an isolated incident, she explained. It was part of a calculated pattern of discrimination affecting countless families across our city. For 45 minutes, Danica walked the commission through her experience and the broader implications. She never raised her voice or showed anger, just steady, dignified truth-telling that held the room spellbound. When she finished, Wyatt stepped forward with their evidence. "Members of the commission," he began, "what you're about to see proves this discrimination was intentional and coordinated." The lights dimmed as they played the real security footage, not the doctored version Briggs had leaked, but the authentic recording showing Danica's professional demeanor and Briggs's obvious prejudice. Next came emails between landlords discussing ways to maintain neighborhood standards, coded language for racial exclusion. Spreadsheets revealed systematic rejection of minority applicants through manipulated qualification criteria. Gasps echoed through the chamber as the evidence mounted. Several commissioners leaned forward, taking rapid notes. Briggs's confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a sickly pallor as his lawyers whispered urgently among themselves. "Mr. Briggs." Commissioner Martinez's voice cut through the murmurs. "Would you care to explain these documents?" Briggs stood, adjusting his tie nervously. "These are clearly fabricated," he blustered. "This is a witch hunt, a publicity stunt orchestrated by Mercer to—" "The emails were retrieved, directly from your servers," Sarah interrupted. "With full metadata intact. The security footage is authenticated. We have sworn statements from former employees detailing your discriminatory policies. Would you like to revise your statement?" The questioning grew increasingly intense. Each commissioner took turns pressing Briggs on specific incidents, policies, and communications. His responses became more defensive and contradictory. By 11:30, he was visibly sweating. At 12:15, Chairwoman Martinez called for a brief recess. The commissioners returned 30 minutes later, their expressions grave. "Based on the overwhelming evidence presented today," Martinez announced, "this commission is referring this matter for criminal investigation. We will also be implementing immediate policy reforms for fair housing enforcement, including independent monitoring of rental applications and decisions." She continued, outlining specific changes, but Danica barely heard the details. Relief flooded through her body as tears welled in her eyes. Wyatt gently squeezed her shoulder in silent support. As they emerged from the courthouse at 1 o'clock, hundreds of people erupted in cheers. Community members surged forward with hugs and thanks. Reporters called out questions, but Danica barely noticed them. Through the crowd, she spotted what mattered most, Luis and Aaliyah running toward her, faces beaming. They crashed into her arms as she knelt to embrace them, all three holding each other tightly. A few steps away, Wyatt watched the scene unfold. His usual reserved expression softened with pride, and something deeper, the satisfaction of witnessing justice prevail and a brave woman stand up for what was right. The grey clouds had finally parted, letting afternoon sunlight shine down on the courthouse steps where a mother held her children, showing them that truth and courage could indeed change the world. The Monday following the hearing dawned bright and clear. Danica sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through news headlines on her phone while Luis and Aaliyah ate breakfast. Every major outlet in the city had picked up the story. Breaking, housing discrimination ring exposed. Read the City Times. Documents reveal systematic bias in rental market. declared the Morning Herald. "Mom, you're famous." Louise grinned, peering at her screen. Danica ruffled his hair. "Not famous, sweetie. Just doing what's right." She helped Aaliyah wipe syrup from her chin. "Come on, time for school." Throughout the day, revelations kept breaking. 3 prominent landlords resigned from their positions after their involvement in the discriminatory network came to light. Internal emails showed years of coordinated efforts to keep certain neighborhoods exclusive through illegal screening practices. By Tuesday afternoon, Danica's inbox was flooded with messages from other single mothers sharing similar experiences. Some had spent years bouncing between temporary housing. Others had been forced to move far from their jobs and children's schools. "I cried reading about your courage," one woman wrote. "You spoke up for all of us." During her lunch break, Wyatt knocked softly on her office door. "Got a minute?" She looked up, noticing how his usual formal demeanor had softened around her lately. "Of course. I'm launching a citywide housing justice initiative," he explained, settling into the chair across from her desk. "We need someone who understands these challenges firsthand to help shape the program. Would you consider taking the lead?" Danica's eyes widened. "Me? But I don't have experience running something like that." "You have the most important kind of experience," Wyatt countered gently. "You lived it, you fought it, and you won." She twisted her hands in her lap, considering. "I'd need flexibility for the kids. We'll make it work," he assured her. "Whatever you need." After a long moment, she nodded. "Okay? Yes." His smile reached his eyes. "Perfect. First meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock. The next few days blurred together in a whirlwind of meetings. Danica found herself sitting beside Wyatt in the executive conference room, sharing insights as they mapped out new policies, fair application processes, transparent decision-making, independent oversight. She noticed how carefully Wyatt listened to her ideas, how he'd lean in slightly when she spoke. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the table, and something warm would flutter in her chest before she quickly looked away. On Thursday morning, news broke that Kellen Briggs had been formally charged with multiple violations of fair housing laws. The district attorney's office estimated penalties could reach into the millions. "Good riddance," Danica's co-worker Jenny declared, dropping by her office. "Did you see his mugshot? He looked terrible." Danica just shook her head. "I don't want to focus on him anymore. We're building something better now." That afternoon, she attended Luis's science fair. His robotics project, the one Wyatt had helped him with, won first place. His proud grin made her heart swell. "Mum, can we call Mr. Wyatt and tell him?" he asked excitedly. Before she could answer, a familiar voice called from the doorway. "No need." Wyatt stood there holding a small bouquet of flowers. "Congratulations, buddy." Luis ran to hug him, while Aaliyah danced around them both. Danica watched, struck by how natural they looked together. Friday evening, Wyatt stopped by her office as she was packing up. "The kids mentioned you make amazing spaghetti and meatballs," he said hesitantly. "Any chance I could get an invitation to try it sometime?" She found herself smiling. "How about tonight?" Later, her small kitchen filled with warmth and laughter as they all gathered around the table. Luis dramatically recounted his science fair victory, while Aaliyah insisted on sitting next to Mr. Wyatt to show him her new drawing. Danica moved around the kitchen, adding final touches to dinner. She noticed how Wyatt had rolled up his sleeves to help set the table, how at ease he seemed in their home. When their fingers brushed as she passed him the garlic bread, neither pulled away quite as quickly as before. Over pasta and garlic bread, they talked and laughed. Wyatt told silly jokes that made the kids giggle. Aaliyah convinced him to try her special secret handshake. Luis proudly showed off his robotics trophy. As Danica watched Wyatt help Aaliyah twirl spaghetti on her fork, she felt something shift in her heart. This wasn't just her boss or a wealthy benefactor anymore. This was someone who had stood beside her through the darkest times, who treated her children with genuine care, who saw her strength when she doubted herself. The evening light streamed golden through her kitchen window, catching the soft smile on Wyatt's face as he listened to Luis's elaborate plans for his next science project. Danica felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was truly living. And the way Wyatt's eyes met hers across the table, warm with unspoken understanding, told her he felt it too. They lingered over dessert, simple vanilla ice cream that somehow tasted better shared together. The kids' laughter echoed off the walls, and Danica realized her small apartment had never felt more like home than it did right now, filled with this unexpected family they were slowly becoming. The trust between them had deepened into something tender and precious. It wasn't just about justice or doing what was right anymore. It was about two people who had found each other in the midst of a storm and discovered something beautiful growing in its wake. As the evening drew to a close, their shared glances held a new warmth, full of possibility and promise. Around her kitchen table, surrounded by the people she loved most, Danica felt her heart open to whatever tomorrow might bring. Spring blossomed across the city, bringing with it waves of positive change. The housing initiative that had started with one building now spread its roots throughout the community. Each week brought new success stories of families finding homes, of barriers being broken down, of hope taking root where fear once grew. In her new role as community liaison, Danica found herself busier than ever. Her office at Mercer Innovations had become a sanctuary for those seeking help. She kept a bowl of candy on her desk, partly for nervous children, partly because it reminded her of how far she'd come from those dark days in the motel room. "Mrs. Torres found an apartment yesterday," she told Wyatt one evening as they sat at her kitchen table. The kids were sprawled on the living room floor doing homework, and the warm evening light painted everything in soft gold. "She called me crying, happy tears this time, said she never thought anyone would give her a chance." Wyatt smiled, that gentle expression he seemed to reserve just for these moments. "You gave her more than a chance. You gave her dignity." It still amazed Danica how naturally he fit into their lives now. He'd step back at public events, letting her take the lead in presentations and interviews. But here, in the quiet of her apartment, he was simply Wyatt, the man who helped Luis practice multiplication tables and listened to Aaliyah's elaborate stories about her day at school. "Mom," Luis called from the living room, "can you check my science homework?" "I've got it," Wyatt responded, pushing back from the table. He ruffled Luis's hair as he sat down beside him, patiently going through each problem. Danica watched them, remembering that first morning at Briggs's building, how small and scared she'd felt, trying to hold her children's hands while her own world crumbled. Now here they were, in a home filled with warmth and laughter, with a man who had helped rebuild not just their lives, but their trust in humanity. The weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Danica's days were filled with community outreach, while her evenings belonged to family time. Wyatt would often join them, bringing takeout when she was too tired to cook, or simply sitting with them as they shared stories about their day. One Wednesday evening, as thunder rumbled outside, Aaliyah climbed into Wyatt's lap with her favorite storybook. "Read it like you did last time," she insisted, with the funny voices. Danica paused in the kitchen doorway, watching as this powerful CEO who commanded boardrooms and managed billions of dollars threw himself completely into performing voices for a children's story about a brave little mouse. These quiet moments meant everything. The way Wyatt would check Luis's math homework twice to build his confidence. how he never missed Aaliyah's dance recitals, always bringing her a single pink rose. The long conversations he and Danica shared after the kids went to bed, talking about their hopes, their fears, their dreams for a better world. On a bright Thursday morning, Aaliyah bounced into the kitchen waving a bright yellow paper. "Mom, Mom, it's for family art night." She thrust the flyer toward Danica. "Next Saturday. Can we go, please?" Danica scanned the invitation. The school was hosting an evening of art activities where families could create together. "Of course we can, sweetheart." "Can Mr. Wyatt come too?" Louise asked from the breakfast table, milk dribbling down his chin. Danica hesitated, but Aaliyah was already running to the phone. "I'll ask him." That evening, when Wyatt stopped by with Chinese food, Aaliyah ambushed him at the door. "Will you come to family art night, please? I'm making something special." Wyatt knelt down to her level, his eyes soft. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." The week flew by, and suddenly Saturday arrived, bright and clear. The school gymnasium had been transformed with colorful paper chains and display boards showing student artwork. Families gathered around tables stocked with art supplies, creating together amid happy chatter and laughter. Louise immediately dragged Wyatt to the paper airplane station, determined to design the perfect flying machine. Danica helped younger children with their projects, her heart full as she watched parents and children working side by side. "Mom," Aaliyah called from across the room, "it's time for the big reveal." The art teacher was helping students pin their family portraits to the display wall. Aaliyah bounced on her toes, clutching her drawing to her chest, waiting for her turn. When the teacher called her name, Aaliyah stepped forward proudly. "This is my family," she announced, holding up her drawing for everyone to see. Danica's breath caught in her throat. There they were, herself, Louise, and Aaliyah, drawn in bright colors and loving detail. But beside them, holding Aaliyah's hand in the picture, stood Wyatt, his smile reaching all the way to his carefully drawn eyes. The room seemed to fade away as Danica turned to look at Wyatt. He stood completely still, staring at the drawing with an expression she'd never seen before, wonder mixed with something deeper, more profound. His eyes glistened in the fluorescent lights of the gymnasium, and for once, the usually composed CEO seemed at a complete loss for words. Aaliyah skipped over to him, tugging at his hand. "Do you like it? See, I drew you right next to me because you're family now, too." Wyatt knelt down slowly, still speechless, and pulled Aaliyah into a gentle hug. Over her shoulder, his eyes met Danica's, filled with emotions too big for words. In that moment, surrounded by construction paper hearts and children's laughter, something shifted, a final piece falling perfectly into place. The truth was there in Aaliyah's crayon drawing. They had become a family, not through obligation or circumstance, but through love, pure and simple as a child's artwork, yet profound enough to leave even a billionaire CEO speechless with joy. The late summer breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass across Memorial Park, as city officials gathered for the historic signing of the new housing protection laws. Bright banners fluttered overhead, announcing the Margaret Holt Fair Housing Act in bold letters that caught the morning sunlight. Danica stood near the podium, her fingers tracing the gold lettering on the formal proclamation that bore her mother's name. She could almost hear her mother's voice. "Stand tall, baby girl. Your dignity can't be taken unless you give it away." The crowd stretched across the park's green expanse, families, community leaders, and reporters all mingling together. Children darted between chairs decorated with yellow ribbons, their laughter mixing with the murmur of conversation. Louise and Aaliyah sat in the front row, dressed in their Sunday best. Aaliyah's yellow dress matched the ribbons, while Louise kept adjusting his tie, a miniature version of Wyatt's. They beamed with pride every time someone mentioned their mother's name. The mayor stepped to the microphone, her voice carrying across the gathering. Today marks a new chapter in our city's history. The Margaret Holt Fair Housing Act ensures that no family will face discrimination when seeking a home. This wouldn't have been possible without the courage of one woman who refused to stay silent. Danica felt a gentle touch at her elbow. Wyatt standing beside her as he had through everything. His presence was different now, no longer carrying the weight of guilt or distance. His smile reached his eyes, warm and certain. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor continued, "please welcome Danica Holt." The applause swelled as Danica approached the podium. Sunlight caught the tears in her eyes, but her voice remained strong and clear. "My mother taught me that a home is more than walls and windows. It's where we learn to love, to hope, to dream. Today we're making sure every family has that chance." She spoke about her mother's struggles as a single parent, about her own journey, and about the community that had rallied around her. "Change doesn't come from one person," she said, looking at her children, at Wyatt, at the faces of supporters. "It comes from all of us choosing to stand together." After the official signing, people gathered under oak trees where local restaurants had set up a celebration feast. Children played tag around picnic tables while adults shared stories and hopes for the future. Wyatt watched as Danica moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and congratulations. She'd grown into her role as a community leader, carrying herself with quiet confidence. Yet she remained genuinely humble, deflecting praise to focus on the work still ahead. As the afternoon sun began its descent, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, families started heading home. Danica gathered her children, and Wyatt fell into step beside them for the walk back to their apartment. Aaliyah skipped ahead, collecting fallen leaves in various shades of green and gold. Luis walked between the adults, telling Wyatt about his latest robotics project with animated gestures. The city looked different now, Danica thought. Not because anything had physically changed, but because hope had a way of transforming everything it touched. Shop owners waved from their doorways. Neighbors called out greetings. This wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was home. At their building, they climbed the stairs together, Aaliyah counting each step out loud. Inside the apartment, the evening light streamed through windows that no longer needed to be hidden behind closed blinds. Before Danica could start dinner preparations, Wyatt asked the children to sit on the couch. His usual composure gave way to nervous energy as he knelt before them. "Luis, Aaliyah," he began, his voice soft but steady. "I want you to know something. Important." He took both their small hands in his. "From the first day I heard you in that conference room, you changed my life, and I promise you I will always be here. I will always show up for science fairs and dance recitals, for nightmares and celebrations, for everything." Aaliyah threw her arms around his neck while Luis tried to maintain his grown-up facade, even as his eyes shone with emotion. Danica watched from the kitchen doorway, tears flowing freely now. When Wyatt stood and turned to her, she reached for his hand without hesitation. The kitchen soon filled with the comfortable sounds of family dinner preparation. Luis carefully set the table, while Aaliyah arranged her latest artwork as a centerpiece. Wyatt and Danica moved around each other with practiced ease, assembling a simple meal of pasta and salad. As they settled around the table, the last rays of sunlight painted everything in soft gold. There was no need for grand declarations or elaborate ceremonies. The truth was in the smallest details. The way Wyatt automatically reached for Aaliyah's cup to help her with the water pitcher, how Luis saved the last garlic bread for his mother, the easy laughter that filled every corner of the room. They were home, not just in the physical space of the apartment, but in the safety of belonging to each other. The future stretched before them, full of possibilities and promise. grounded in the love that had brought them together and the courage that had helped them stand strong. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.